Good afternoon, gentlemen. Welcome once again to another episode of The Scoop. We'll be joined today by our favorite guys already. Gentlemen, unfortunately, the other gents won't be able to make it through today. Vuyo is off, Sisa is off, and Kofi is off. So it's just us four today. We'll basically just continue as we have planned and obviously look into all the news that have been making headlines this week and obviously tap into Johnny Sexton copping 3 weeks, Jordan Hendrickse, Masuku, and other players have been selected, the Sharks, and we'll also look at the Lions Tour series announcement. And obviously, Matthew Proudfoot has joined Alistair Coetzee in the Namibian rugby squad. And then we'll touch on the Rugby Championship, Bledisloe Cup, and Argentina, and some of those players that we think the Springboks, especially Rassie Erasmus and Jacques Nienaber, will be looking at in making their final decision to make the Springbok Rugby World Cup squad. Gents, how you guys doing? Enda, how's your week been so far?
All good, mate, all good. Afternoon, everyone. Looking forward to today's session. It's been a quiet weekend rugby-wise, unfortunately.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely. So looking forward to next weekend.
All right, cool. Jade, how are things going for you this week?
Good. It's going good. It's been quiet, like Anders said. But I just want to say to the guys, Vuyo and Kofi and those guys missing out in the pod today, well played, guys. Choosing family time when there's no rugby. Well played, guys. Well played.
Hugh, how's your week been so far?
All right, guys. Nice to see you. Yeah, it's been good. Like Ender said, no real rugby, no broadcast rugby, unfortunately for all of us who enjoy watching the Tier 2. But yeah, looking forward to today's session, looking forward to get stuck into it and looking ahead to next week, back to normal.
Yeah, back to normal, as we say. Gentlemen, obviously the first topic that we're going to touch on to is the Sexton copping 3 weeks. I mean, which is not much of a dent, because looking at all the warm-up games that are going to take place prior to the actual World Cup. And since you're Irish and obviously in the Irish mix, basically, I mean, looking at the mood and obviously how are the news received in Ireland, obviously with Johnny Sexton being a key figure in the Irish rugby team?
As you might expect, to be honest, we're happy with the decision.
Yeah,
there's no denying that. And to be from looking at the judgment, there's also, I'd highly recommend reading a blog on this piece actually by Rugby and the Law. He's on Twitter. Mm-hmm. His name is Ben. He's from Morgan Stanley Law, and he did a really good analysis of the entire case, why it took so long, the evidence and everything. And after reading that, to be honest, I have to say that I probably think it is a fair sanction.
Yep. There
is very little evidence as to what he actually said.
100%.
He did admit to saying something, and all of the referees on the pitch didn't hear him. Mm-hmm. Nobody else heard him, so he admitted to what he said. Obviously, there was probably more to it, but we'll never know exactly what he said.
Yeah.
So for me, definitely, I think it is a fair punishment. I know there was a popular Twitter account that also compared this decision to Dylan Hartley's ban, which to me is just absolutely outrageous.
Yeah.
I mean, Dylan Hartley was red carded for calling Wayne Barnes an effing cheat. His record included bans of 6 months for gouging 2 players in one match, 8 weeks for biting Ferris, and 2 weeks for punching Rory Best. So there's absolutely no comparison between the two.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make that very clear. But for me, a fair judgment.
No, 100%. I truly agree. I mean, there's definitely no comparison to Hartley as well, because looking at Hartley's history, and obviously he had quite a lot of red cards in his playing career as well. So, yeah, his disciplinary record is not really good. And Johnny Sexton, obviously, this would be his first, obviously, offense. So I'm sure looking into that, obviously there is a bit of leniency, as we've seen with red cards previously for high tackles. If you've had a clean record, they tend to be lenient, and obviously they'll give you 6 weeks and then obviously drop that down to 3 because of your good clean record as well. From Jade, from your South African perspective, how do you think the South Africans reacted to this particular news?
I think South Africans a lot is based on emotions, and obviously doing a comparison between Sexton and Rassie.
Yeah.
But like Andy said now, from a legal perspective, there's no proof that somebody heard him or a recording as for him, what he exactly said. So that throws the comparison between Rassie and Sexton out to the window, where there was a video leak when it came to Rassie and Nick Perry a few years ago. So I think there's a lot of emotion from South Africa. We feel that, he got off lightly. From a rugby perspective, I mean, come on, guys. You can't not have a World Cup with, Johnny Sexton in it. So from a rugby perspective, I'm okay with that 3 weeks to have him in the World Cup, to give Ireland their full strength team.
Yeah.
But from a South African perspective, we do look at it and say, okay, what is the comparison between Sexton and Rassie? There's no real fair comparison, but it's two completely different cases. So, yeah, let's take the 3 weeks and move on.
Fair enough. From a Welsh perspective, Hugh?
So I think, for pure comedy perspective, I think a lot of Welsh people were a bit gutted that Johnny Sexton wasn't going to miss the World Cup. I think, there's no love lost between Welsh and Irish fans, given that the Irish enjoy kicking our asses up and down the URC every week. I think the thing for me that makes it, I can't decide whether it makes it better or worse, the fact that he wasn't playing in the game at the time when he did this. He's come onto the pitch as like a member of the supporting group from Leinster, and accosted the referee as a spectator. And I think I said before that kind of makes it a bit worse, and I think I'll stick with that. I was talking about it with Lee from the Scarlets podcast that we do, and his view was that 3-week ban or 3-game ban, yes, but it's not a great optic that those 3 games are the World Cup warm-ups, which in a lot of people's minds, particularly the audience's minds, are meaningless games, or at least not competitive games. So it kind of looks like they've given him a ban that is convenient. Now, that may or may not be the case. Like, I haven't read the document that Ender's read.
Yep.
So that's fair enough. I think it's not a brilliant look. And, in terms of the message it sends, I think maybe European Rugby had an opportunity to be quite firm on this. We talk about rugby values a lot. I don't necessarily think rugby values are really a thing when you compare to what people, at least at the top of the game, actually behave like. But that's a story for another day.
Yeah.
I think potentially you could have had an opportunity to set an example here, and they backed out of it. But at the end of the day, I do agree with Jade. As much as being a rival of Ireland, I want to see them have a disadvantage. As a rugby neutral, you want the best players playing at the World Cup, and we've got that. So I'm sure we'll all forget about it quite quickly.
No, fair enough. And then what also was making headlines or news this week was the Lions tour announcement to Australia for 2027. There's not really much we can dive into this particular topic, but I just wanted to gauge the Irish and the Welsh perspective regarding, who would be the next British and Irish coach. Looking at, obviously, there's Bothwick with England. I think he's fairly new. He's probably not in the running. There is Farrell with Ireland, who's probably in the running, and maybe a bit of the Scottish coach in Gregor Townsend. But who do you guys think might be in the running for this particular job, Enda and Hugh? You guys can jump on to this one.
I think Farrell's got to be the front runner. I think he turned down the chance to be Gatland's assistant last time.
Yeah.
To focus on Ireland. So it's a question of, when Gatland was the coach, he was given permission by Wales to go and do that, which some people in Wales didn't like. They felt he should be committed to Wales. So it's a question. I think it's basically in Farrell's court. Does he want to step away from Ireland? I don't think you can never rule out Gatland for the Lions job. I don't think people in Wales would take kindly to him taking off to go and do that again at this point as things stand. And I don't think Townsend is Lions head coach material personally. So yeah, over to you, Ender. I think Farrell's number one at the moment.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you, to be honest. There is nobody else in the reckoning. Now, we'll see how the World Cup goes, of course. But based on the Six Nations form and how Ireland are actually playing and the style of play, like if you all remember, which I'm sure you do, when the Lions toured South Africa last, the quality of play played by the Lions was just really poor to watch. It was sore on the eye. Like, it was definitely one for the purists. And I think Andy Farrell would rip that up and he'd go in with a different script and change things up. So I think at the moment, as things stand, he's certainly the front runner for me anyway. But we'll see based on what happens in the World Cup. But I'd be surprised. And he's been involved in previous tours as well, to some extent. So he knows how they're run. He knows what's involved in getting the best out of the players. And I know we have an agenda, and I don't want to dwell on the piece too long on Sexton. I did just have to jump in on one more piece.
Yeah,
if you guys don't mind. So just based on, unlike foul play, which has prescribed guidelines, it is important just to note that for misconduct, the EPCR disciplinary rules provide that, a sanction can consist of other things apart from a ban of playing. So, for example, they could have given him a caution, reprimanded him, warned him, or issued him a fine, especially if you look at what Jack Noel did on Twitter. So, to me, it does seem like they did go down the more harsh route of actually banning the player, which I think was definitely a good sign, because like all of us, I'd say would agree what he did was unacceptable and he needed to be punished for it. But for me, the panel certainly did go down on the harsher side. And obviously it could have been 6 weeks, but we all know mitigation has to be a factor, and he does have an excellent record disciplinary wise. But we'll leave it there and we'll move on, as Jade said. But I just want to get that piece in there.
Yeah, fair enough. On this other topic then, there's a lot of movement obviously within the coaching aspect. We've seen Proudfoot joining Alistair Coetzee. Jade, I'm going to start with you on that one, but I also just want to mention we've seen Sean Everett now moving to Edinburgh. We are also familiar with Albert van den Berg, who's also joined Scarlets as well. I know that Kieran Crowley will also join a Japanese team called Honda Heat, obviously after his stint with Italy. But then I want to start with the Proudfoot element. We've seen Proudfoot work with Rassie Erasmus and winning a World Cup in 2019. From then onwards, he moved to England to join Eddie Jones. There wasn't really much out of that relationship. And I think if we look back at the conversation we had with Kofi, where he mentioned obviously the relationship Eddie Jones has with his assistant coaches. I mean, he's churned out quite a few, but there wasn't much to dwell onto about that. And then now he's joined. And then he moved to Maties, which is a university in South Africa, one of the best and the strong universities where rugby is concerned, and obviously where Varsity Cup is concerned, as being the only university that has won the Varsity Cup so many times in the country so far. But he didn't really do well with that particular team. Now he's joined Alistair Coetzee. Jade, when we look at Proudfoot, he was fortunate enough, obviously, within the Rassie era, because Rassie Erasmus initially did not want Matthew Proudfoot as part of the Springbok coaching squad, because Rassie already had Peter de Villiers from France as his forwards coach. What are your thoughts looking at Proudfoot's history and Proudfoot's coaching career, and now being back into helping out in Namibia?
Yeah, so I'll touch on Proudfoot. There's a lot of guys judging Matthew Proudfoot now with regards to his Maties record that they had now.
Yeah.
And for me, I think that's unfair. I don't know. It's very hard to come from a referee, from an international experience and going down to, let's say, semi-pro, which Varsity Cup is basically semi-pro, not yet fully professional yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, for Matthew Proudfoot to do that, coaching a bunch of professional guys on a weekly basis, coming down into a setup where he's a coach of Maties, it's different. It's difficult. And also remember the amount of players that the top universities lose every year, and you have to rebuild from scratch again. So I'm not going to judge him based on that, but I can judge him on what he's done at England, and I can judge him on how the box forwards has progressed under Dan Human. And I think Dion Davids is there as well now as their forwards coach. And from 2019 until now, there's been a progression in terms of the box forwards. There's been progression and they've been more dynamic. The scrums has been better than what it was under Matthew Proudfoot. Now he's heading off to Namibia to help Alistair Coetzee at the World Cup. I don't know what effect he'll have there because, like I said, at Matis, he wasn't, the best guy to coach a semi-professional team coming from professional era. Now he's into that setup again, where 50% of the Namibians are not even full-time rugby players. Some of them are still working. It's difficult to get that squad together. What is the expectation in the World Cup? Do they want to get better at certain aspects?
Yeah.
So it's very difficult. It's going to be a difficult job for him. The other two, Sean Everett, Albert van der Berg, I can touch on them. I know Albert from the work that he done at Griquas, him and Brent Jansen van Rensburg a few years ago.
Yeah.
They were brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Them two as a pair of coaches. They did well in the Currie Cup. They were brilliant. Sean Everett as well so has a high pedigree and a high, he's highly rated in South Africa, so I expect him to do well in Europe. The one for me and the one that got away for European rugby is Crowley. Kieran Crowley is an absolute gem of a coach. We've seen what he's done with Italy. It's a shame that he's going out of the international setup so soon. However, I think that's the big surprise for me is Kieran Crowley. I really thought he would move to one of the Super Rugby franchises, but he's taken on the job in Japan.
Yeah. Hey, money talks, eh? Hugh, what are your thoughts? I mean, you've been also trying to tap into Albert van der Berg's history or also into Sean Everett's just to gauge a bit of information. What are your findings? I mean, what are your thoughts with regards to these acquisitions now?
It's actually been quite difficult to research. So his Wikipedia page says that he still works in Japan. But I understand that he actually left Japan some years ago now.
Yeah.
So I saw that he was coaching at the Currie Cup side that you guys referenced. And the Scarlets website says that was successful. But I've been looking at that side that he coached record. They finished third one season, but apart from that, they've been pretty much rooted to the bottom. So I'm a bit confused there. Yeah. And then you, Scoop, mentioned the Lions and some kind of controversy. So give me the deets on that. What has happened here?
So the information regarding Albert van der Berg and the Golden Lions, obviously the news is out. Obviously it was out in South Africa as well. There was controversy with regards to Albert van der Berg's relationship and obviously the head coach of the Lions because he was the assistant coach. Obviously, Albert van der Berg
when was that? Was that last season? Or
this past season now. This past URC season, basically.
Oh, wow, okay. That's not mentioned
so
anywhere.
he wasn't.
It's not mentioned anywhere.
I'll send you the link. So he wasn't really impressed with the head coach, and obviously he had sent out a WhatsApp message to the CEO of the Lions, basically sharing his disapproval of the coaching methods that were currently utilized within the Lions setup, and obviously since then he did not rock up for work, and obviously then that's when the rift kind of started, and obviously he basically they had to terminate his contract, and then now obviously I think in June when did he sign with Scarlets? In June this year, right? Beginning of June,
I
think.
Exactly. Season,
Yeah, so now recently, obviously he's recently signed with the Scarlets, but he is like Jade said, he is a very formidable coach because he did very well with Griquas in the Currie Cup. Jade, do you want to jump on as well?
Yes, I can touch base on, Griquas because I have close ties to the union itself. So I can touch base on what you'll get from Albert van der Berg. Albert van der Berg is old school. During his playing career, he grew up playing under Andre Margraaf, and then he moved over to the Sharks, in a successful era where Ian McIntosh was still in the back end in the Sharks as well.
Yeah.
So he's very old school when it comes to coaching. The pedigree is very old school, but he's very dynamic as well in his views. So I think Scarlets are onto something here. I think you might see a difference with Albert van der Berg being there.
Does that help you?
This is brilliant. Thank you so much, guys.
Fair enough. All right. Enda, you want to join in on the coaching aspect of these guys coming into Europe now? The South African coaches.
Just one piece, I suppose, on Proudfoot. We don't. It was interesting. I saw one of your tweets earlier on the week about on what sort of impact he actually had on the 2019 successful Springboks World Cup win, and how significant that actually was. And it was really interesting to hear Jade say that, you know, the pack has certainly improved, and I think definitely on the scrum side I'd agree with that as well. And it was interesting to see him under Eddie Jones from 2020. Now we all know how England have performed since the World Cup in 2019. So for me, it seems like he has an impressive CV in ways, but I would just wonder on the actual impact he had on those teams. But the best of luck to him. I mean, I don't know an awful lot about him, but I know who he was involved with.
Fair enough.
Best of luck to him.
Did he go to England straight after the World Cup?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
yeah,
so
2020.
just one quick memory that I have of that then. So obviously in the World Cup final, South Africa set this maul in midfield in one of the plays, and it completely caught England out, and I think it got South Africa a penalty, which they kicked 3 points from. So in the first game that Proudfoot was coach of England, they copied this, and England formed a maul in midfield to try and catch the opponents out. I guess it must have been in the Six Nations. So it might have been against Scotland, I'll have to check, but it was a disaster. They completely messed it up, and they conceded a penalty, and then they never tried it again. So that was quite funny.
It was actually Rassie's plan in the World Cup. So then Proudfoot must have taken, obviously, the IP from there and tried to try and use it again as well against the Six Nations sides. Yes, Enda.
That's very interesting, yeah, because I remember Squidge Rugby pointed this out in one of his analysis pieces, that this is probably something Rassie picked up during his time at Munster, because it was a move used by one of the Munster squads many years ago, and it was definitely something that Rassie would have had in his back pocket or would have learned about. So, yeah, absolutely fascinating and interesting to hear that it absolutely backfired for Proudfoot when he was involved with England.
That's crazy. Sticking to England, gents, just one more topic then before we jump onto Rugby Championship. They've named their squad again. I think they've had, before I get into that, you want to jump on?
Get my hand up in preparation because I've got a fair bit to say about England.
Oh, fair enough. Before we jump on to the Rugby Championship aspect, they've basically omitted Zach Mercer again. I mean, I don't know, guys. I'm not in the UK at the moment. Obviously, Hugh, you are in the UK, and you would be more familiar with the news around the selection processes in that area. I don't know, man. I think Zach Mercer is a brilliant number 8. He's a very good footballer as well. I mean, he's got the quality, he's got the skills, he's got the physique, he's got the body. He's played around, obviously, at Bath and then moved to France, but he's still not making it he didn't make it under Eddie Jones. I think he had 1 cap or 2. He seems to be not in favor with Bothwick as well. I mean, what is the mood within the selection process of the English squad?
Yeah, so I've got a little bit to say about this, like I said, so I'm going to try and not take too much time. But on Mercer, so he's been playing for Montpellier the last 2 years. He was top 14 player of the year, I want to say, 2 years ago when they won the league. And he was maybe, again, Montpellier's best player last season, I want to say, maybe voted that. As a number 8, he's quite slight. He's more of a modern number 8. If you look at someone like Sam Simmons, he's close to someone like that than, say, I don't know, a Nick Williams or a Billy Vunipola. I think in the English media, it's kind of like the shiny new thing. I think it's like, oh, he's exotic, he's been doing well in France, so I'll get him in, he'll solve all the problems. I don't know. He's got 2 international caps, and they were a fair while ago. Obviously, he was in the squad, so he was in a wider training squad for England, and he got dropped. So Borthwick has clearly had a good look at him and decided he's not the guy. But that kind of brings me on to a wider point about the England training squad. So if anybody's noticed that there's been a lot of England training squad announcements, the reason for that is that the English Premiership has got a mandatory 5-week stand-down period for player welfare. So once a club side plays its last game of the season, they then stand down the players for 5 weeks, and they can't even join an international training camp, let alone play a game. So what that means is that all the players from the English semi-finals and finals weren't available to Borthwick at the beginning of the summer.
Yeah.
Now, you would expect, and we have since seen, that the majority of England's team will be made up of Leicester and Saracens players. But with them not available, Borthwick was forced to pick a lot of players who he clearly was never going to take to the World Cup just to make up the numbers. And then as these Leicester and Saracens and Sale and Northampton players have become available, he's dropped those and brought in the new guys. But this isn't something that's like happened overnight. It happened gradually over the course of, 3 or 4 squad announcements. So just to put some numbers on it, of the original squad that Borthwick called up at the beginning of the summer, 18 have been dropped and 22 have been added. So that works out as a 56% turnover rate. Now, any organisation will tell you, oh my God, a 56% turnover rate in about 1.5 months.
Yeah.
What is going on here? And that is wasted coaching time.
Yeah.
So from Borthwick's point of view, his coach's point of view, his assistant coaches, his strength and conditioning coaches, they've put time into players who they had no intent of taking, and they've not been able to put time into players who they did intend on taking. And then from the players' point of view, they must, in that first player meeting, they must have been all sat around looking at each other going, well, none of us are going to the World Cup. What are we doing here? So it must have been a miserable environment. And then my last point is on the players that they bring in. If you look down the names that are in this squad, you'll see the likes of George Ford. Billy Vunipola's injured, but he is with the squad. You've got Elliot Daly in there. You've got Danny Kerr in there. These are players that England dropped quite publicly and quite pointedly. Eddie Jones was not shy of telling the world exactly what he thought of these players. And opposition coaches like Warren Gatland and Fabien Galtier were not shy in telling the world that players like George Ford, we target George Ford because he's a rubbish defender and things. These are players that we know have been not rated, and England decided at some point, these aren't the guys for us. But they're back in, and they're back in because the guys that they decided to bring in just haven't cut it, just haven't managed to make it at international level. I'm going to do a thread on this at some point, but if you look at the numbers of new players, new capped players, or players at least brought into the squads to be available for selection, so many get discarded. They either don't get caps or they get canned after 2 or 3 caps. When you consider that England have only 3 or 4 times finished outside the top 4 at the under-20s championship ever, their conversion rate of getting young players into the England squad and establishing them as internationals is worse than Wales is. That's incredible when you consider we've only got 4 pro teams. Yeah. So there's clearly, I don't think I know because he said it. Eddie Jones didn't rate half of the England players. He thought they were rubbish. And I think Borthwick is starting to get to that point as well where, oh crap, I wanted to bring in all these new guys, but here I am reverting to the team that we had in 2019 because there's literally nobody else. So, I don't know. If I didn't hate England, I'd worry for them.
Fair enough. I mean, this seems quite an interesting topic to also have. I mean, the amount of chopping and changing of the players. I mean, if you are changing over 50% of your squad over a duration of 2 to 3 months, that's really scary stuff. So then who do they take in the World Cup as their final squad? And what are your thoughts regarding this particular topic as well?
It's just very interesting, isn't it, hearing you go through everything, especially when you compare it with something like the box squad, which we could all probably pick maybe 95% of those 33 players who are going to be picked for the World Cup squad. But whereas with England, it's quite difficult because of the amount of chopping and changing. And again, famously, Eddie Jones would just, if the media were calling for a player to be included and they were highlighting, a good player's performances in the Premiership, he famously would not select those players. It was absolutely outrageous. So for me, someone like Danny Kerr, I'm absolutely delighted to see him in there. I know he's in his mid-30s now, but he's been in the form of his life for the last couple of years, and he was definitely purposely left out by Eddie Jones. So it's great to see somebody like him in there. And looking at the squads, I mean, they do have very, very good players on paper. But I mean, we didn't see much from them, did we, in the lead up to the summer series now that's coming up. So really, I'm not it's an exciting squad. There's been a lot of chopping and changing, but for me, it's not going to be a squad that's going to be competitive at the World Cup.
Gee, fair enough. Jade, I want to put a spanner in the works here. If you had an option, Danny Kerr or Van Poortvliet to start for England, who do you choose?
Oh, depends how many strapping is available for Danny Kerr for the World Cup. I honestly, Van Poortvliet, the horror pass that he threw into was it Papali's hands, always plays in the back of my mind whenever I see his name. The horror game he had against the All Blacks always plays in the back of my mind. I would go with Danny Kerr because there's nobody else in England putting up their hand in that number 9 position besides Kerr, and I think the other one is Young. But for me, for England to touch on that whole thing, guys, who from that team, I can ask you an honest question, who from that team on current form scares you? If you're playing England tomorrow, would you be petrified and say, I need to watch out for this guy or that guy? I can't find the name. Maybe Ginge, maybe Owen Farrell on his day, Tuolangi on their day, but that team has regressed so much this past 3 or 4 years. It's I don't know what the problem is.
Yeah, Hugh's going to give you all the answers.
Just quickly on Danny Kerr, I believe his last England cap, he was subbed on 30 minutes by Eddie Jones. So quite publicly humiliated. So that's kind of where he is. So it's interesting to see Borthwick bring him back in. English players that scare me. Owen Farrell if he's playing 10, less so if he's playing 12. Tuolangi if he's fit, which he never is, so don't need to worry about that. And then Freddie Stewart at 15, I think is international class. I think he is the only player that England have produced in the last 5 years that I would take for Wales. That's kind of it. Itoje if he's firing, but he's not been for the last couple of years. Now, hopefully that's because of some kind of injury issue or something else we don't know. But yeah, Itoje I think is a top class player, but he's not been where he has been lately. I don't know. On Wales, we're short on tight heads, so I'd take a couple of tight heads. Apart from that, you can keep him.
Yeah, Jade ends pair after that.
Quick one on England. I know we're touching too much on England at the moment, but I read a few articles, maybe it's rumours or not, of there's a few English players that's got, been tapped up by Japanese teams, like Itoje, and I think Smith was the other one. And I know Mercer hasn't been selected as well because he's playing in France, but they have brought back Willis that plays for Toulouse. Do you think England will change their rules in the next few years to select players, playing in different other leagues, or do you think they will stick with their rule of they can only play in their current league?
I think Enda wants to quickly answer that one, or then let's pair jump in, and then Enda, you can quickly answer that.
Hello, everyone. I just want to ask, when it comes to the English nines, I just want to know the logic of leaving Alex Mitchell out, because I thought he's probably comfortably one of England's best 9, but he's been left out. He wasn't even picked in one of the squads. So I kind of want to know what the logic behind that is.
Okay, and you can jump on with your answer for Jade, and then I think who might be a better person to answer the English one.
So looking at that policy that they have, the IRFU have a similar policy, except it's not an official policy. It's not written down on paper, but the IRFU do not select any players whatsoever who play abroad, apart from Johnny Sexton, because he's Johnny Sexton. And I think England won't. I don't think they'll go back on that policy. I think it'll stay in place, because if they do and they start selecting players from abroad, they're going to lose a ton of players. And that's the reality of it. The reason it's there is to keep the best players in England and to ensure that they get enough time off and enough rest periods and enough time to prepare for big tournaments. So for me, they'll absolutely keep that policy in place, and I think they should. And it's probably an unpopular opinion, especially in the rugby Twitter space, not to pick players who are based abroad. But if we're all talking about player welfare and reducing the amount of games that players play, like if you look at the IRFU system, it is arguably the best system in terms of player welfare. So you need to keep your best players at home, and the best way to do it is to have a policy in place that discourages those players from leaving. probably unpopular, but those being my thoughts, I doubt they'll get rid of it.
Hugh, on the half-back situation, do you have any answers regarding that?
I'm not a good person to ask about this. The reason for this is that I don't rate any of England's nines. I wouldn't take any of them for Wales. I don't think any of them get into the Scottish team. I don't think any of them get into the Irish team. I don't think any of them get into the French team. I think a couple get into Italy's team. I think nine. When I do my thread, I'll be using it as an example. I think England called up Ben Spencer, Rafi Quirk, Harry Randall, and Alex Mitchell at some point during this summer, and they've all been dropped by Borthwick. And they're sticking around with Tom Youngs and Danny Kerr, who were capped, I think, before 2010. So there you go. There's the English nine situation.
You had to mention before 2010, meaning that these guys have been playing for the past 13 years. That is incredible. They haven't produced a good nine in over 13 years, basically. That's what we're saying here right now.
That's my opinion.
Hectic. Enda?
Just on the number 9 selection policy, I think as well, Borthwick knows Ben Youngs extremely well. So I think that's one of the reasons he's definitely there, because obviously he was coaching him. And second, as we spoke about, Kerr has been in fine form. So I think those are the main reasons. But definitely, Ben Youngs was heavily involved with Borthwick, obviously, when Borthwick was in charge of Leicester. So I think that's why he's in there.
No, fair enough. All right, gentlemen, thank you. We are currently moving past, obviously, then the headlines. And now we're going to touch on to what is going to take place next week. Obviously, after 2 rounds of Rugby Championship, there's one more game this weekend coming. South Africa are playing Argentina, and New Zealand are playing Australia in the first Bledisloe Cup of 2023. Obviously, coaches now will probably be looking at their final preparations for their squads going into the warm-up games, the rugby warm-up games for the World Cup. And we're going to start off maybe with the Bledisloe Cup and then move into the Springboks Argentina. There's a few players with asterisks next to their names for the Springbok team. And then obviously we look at the culling, or obviously the omission from the Wallabies team. We see Tom Wright hasn't been selected, Reece Hodge hasn't been selected, Pete Samu hasn't been selected. And it raises questions with regards to the Wallabies selection and what Eddie Jones is thinking going into this first Bledisloe Cup as well. Jade, let's start off with you. Bledisloe Cup, All Blacks and Australia. I mean, this is a big one for both these teams. How important is this for not Eddie Jones yet, but for Foster to go 3-0 in this current tournament at the moment? Looking at how things transpired last year, now he's looking at 3-0, winning all 3 games in the Rugby Championship without losing a game. Obviously, they're playing in Australia for the first round, and the second round is played in New Zealand. What are your thoughts regarding Foster's performance so far, and obviously going into this game? What would you like to see going into Australia for the first Bledisloe Cup?
Okay, for me, I see New Zealand has said, Foster has come out and said that, there will be, exactly what Jason Ryan had said I heard it on the breakdown on last week ago, but he said that New Zealand will be treating this similar to the way they will treat a game in France in the World Cup, where they will only travel out to Australia on Thursday and they'll go with a limited amount of squad. The rest of the guys will be free to play NPC. That would also show Foster's hand as to what he's thinking towards the World Cup, and we'll also have a clear indication of who is actually going to be a part of his 33 with the guys who'll be left behind. Now, for Foster, for this game, it's the first time, in a few years that people's eyes has been now fully focused on New Zealand, because they blasted the box last week. They put the marker down, and everybody would like to see, are they going to follow up? Is this the style they're going to play? The kicking out of the 22, putting bombs up with Bodie and having 5 regular kickers in the back line with their tactical kicking. Would we see, are they going to follow this plan? Is this what Foster is all about? Is this New Zealand? Or would they be caught up in the emotion of the Bledisloe Cup game. Now, I know you and can relate to this as well, because we do have a close derbies in Europe. But I mean, if you look at like a Calcutta Cup in England, where Scotland plays against England, form goes out of the window during that game. So you can never, ever write off Australia. If you look at it over the past 20 games or so, Australia has beaten the All Blacks more times than the Box. So it just shows you that they can do it.
Yeah.
So it's not to say Foster would go in and implement and it's going to be a walkover or not. The eyes will be on Foster and his game plan. Can they produce what they produced in the first 20 minutes last week again? Is that the game plan? Or will he look at, other aspects of maybe trying to tie Australia, going at them more physically, more structured play? So it'll be interesting. But like I said, over the past 3 years with Ian Foster, you don't know what you're going to get. You can get brilliant rugby and you can get shambles. So let's see what game he brings.
No, fair enough. I mean, in terms of everyone being apprehensive leading into this game, it makes sense because you never know. One moment New Zealand is on a high, the next moment they're copying big ones. And obviously with Ian Foster tenure has been like that as well. It's been quite a roller coaster. Enda, your thoughts regarding this first Bledisloe Cup on the New Zealand side of things?
From New Zealand, I think they're capable of absolutely putting in a really good performance and absolutely smashing Australia, to be honest. I'm very, very, very nervous for Australia. I think, though, as on Jade's point, anything can happen in the Bledisloe Cup game, just like the Calcutta Cup. There'll be a lot of emotion involved. Eddie is probably already, I think it's safe to say, under pressure.
Yeah.
I know he's come out in the media and said that, basically they're using this as a glorified warm-up, all of these games. So for me, I think New Zealand's, it'll be really interesting to see the squad that's selected, but I think they're going to do a number on whoever they put out. They put out their second 15, if we can even refer to a second 15, and they'll do a job on them.
Yeah. But
for me, they've again, I know I've touched on it a good few times, but under Joe Schmidt's really has his fingerprints all over this squad now. So I think if they can put everything together, they could really put up a high score. But we'll wait and see. But absolutely nervous for Australia.
Hugh.
Yeah, over the Bledisloe, I've criticised Australia more than anybody, but I just can't shake the feeling that they can't lose all of their games before the World Cup. Surely they can't lose because the 2 games already, then 2 games against New Zealand. I think they've got to warm up against France.
Yeah,
they got to win at least one of them, surely. And with these back-to-backs, and like everybody's rightly said, with the Bledisloe, it's kind of like funny things can happen, and back-to-back games playing each other twice. I just can't help but feeling that they're going to win one of those.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ender's absolutely right. With your logical hat on, you'd say that the All Blacks should smash him. It should absolutely smash him.
Okay. No, fair enough. I want to jump now into the Box. There's been plenty of talk, plenty of murmurs, especially in the number 11 jersey. The fans are not too happy with current form of Makazole Mapimpi. I know one of our conversations, I think 2 weeks ago, there was a lot of defense regarding Mapimpi. And now, obviously, there's murmurs that Kurtley Arendse is going to start now ahead of Mapimpi at number 11. That number 11 spot is quite important. That number 11 spot is probably has an asterisk next to its name with regards to the World Cup selection. Jade, your thoughts regarding Arendse versus Mapimpi at this point in time, going into the Argentina game? Spare, you can jump in after this, huh?
Arendse is on form, and I mean, the guy scored a hat-trick in his last game, so he's the form winger. But guys, if you turn back the clock 12 months ago, Lukanya was undisputed as a number 13 in the team, and now there's questions, maybe Jesse Creel should come in at 13.
Yeah.
And Makazole Mapimpi was undroppable. So I mentioned this a few weeks ago. If you've seen the good international teams, and if you're looking at maybe, for example, the Ted and Shag era at New Zealand, there was this perception that you have to play bad in your Springbok jersey or in your All Black jersey before you lose your spot. I mean, you've seen it. Manono not performing at all. Comes put on the black jersey, it's back to normal.
Yeah.
Now, Mapimpi, he can't be gunned on last week's performance playing against World Jordan where everything is just going on song on that day. I think it's unfair to bring his club form into this. I think Curtly Arendse, yes, he deserves his chance. If you're going to give him the game the weekend, so you got to think clearly what you're going to do with Mapimpi. You can't decide, okay, Curtly Arendse comes in, 2 games later, we're going to go back to Mapimpi again. You're going to have to make your decisions, either Arendse or Mapimpi. And if you're going to choose Mapimpi, back him, he will come back into form.
Yeah.
When did Mapimpi get a ball in a one-on-one situation? In last week's game, he never got. Whereas Curtly Arendse got plenty of ball in a one-on-one situation.
Yeah.
I know he's not like Arendse, and he's not like a winger that looks for work, that runs the short ball off the 9. I know he's not that kind of winger, but he's a finisher. The guy knows how to finish. The guy's over 20 test tries. His try to game ratio is world class. We can't just go ahead and throw everything against Mapimpi and say, listen, it's time for Arendse to come in. I think give him another game, let him work on his confidence. He came from a bad URC season. Work on his confidence, let him score a few tries. Then you'll see the best of him again. Unfortunately, with international rugby, sometimes, the form guy doesn't play. Sometimes in international rugby, the form player is not the best player in the national team. Sometimes the guys off form is a better player in that national setup.
100%. Spare, and then Hugh after that.
My take with this Magazole Mapimpi situation, and I absolutely love him because I'm a Shark supporter. But I feel like in international footy, when you want to give grace to certain players, I think it's very important to look at their careers and ask yourself if maybe that specific player has been like a top 3 player in his position over a period of time. Like, I'll take, for example, a Lukhanyo currently who's not performing to the standards that we all expect him to perform. But nobody is absolutely going to call him to be benched or anything.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to say, I haven't seen it so far on the timeline. Maybe y'all have seen it. Nobody has ever said so far that Lukhanyo is shit, Creel must start.
Yeah.
Because he has been able, for the past, I don't know how many seasons, shown us that he is, on his day, a top 2 player in the world in his position. And with Magazole Mapimpi, I don't quite think he's that guy. As much as I love him, I think with someone who like Curtly Arendse on his form, I feel like that kind of form cannot be ignored for someone like Magazole Mapimpi. I just that's my opinion. Like, that kind of form is should be starting. That the person who's on that type of form should be starting for us. As much as I love Magazole Mapimpi, I just feel like he's not that player that I can argue he's a top 2 winger in the world. Therefore, he should be given time and the grace. I feel like Curtly Arendse is very hot right now. He's been proving himself consistently every single game he's played for the Springboks since his debut, and I feel like they should give him his time now.
Fair. I've got a question for you guys, but you go ahead and then I'll ask my question.
So I've got a question. Is it accepted that Arendse and Colby will not be picked in the same team? You guys watch South Africa more than me, but I can't remember them ever playing together. Obviously, as someone who only watches the Springboks and doesn't watch these guys week in, week out, they're very similar players, obviously similar statures, much more steppers than line game guys. So if it is accepted that they wouldn't play together because they're too similar, then that kind of forces you to play a Mapimpi style player or someone similar to Mapimpi. I have to say that I think Mapimpi is world class, and I think he does deserve to be played into form, even at international level. I think the kind of winger that he is, I think Mapimpi, Damien Penaud and Josh Adams are the 3 for me that any team would take, honestly.
I think Jade has got an answer for you there, Hugh.
Yeah, so basically, ideally, most South Africans would like to see the combination of Colby 15, Curtly 14, or Kirtley 15, Colby 14, and then Makazole on the other wing. That would be the ideal situation. I do get what you're saying, and I agree 100% with you. If you're putting in Kirtley Arendse at 11, you do not have a power winger. And you want actually that, maybe a little bit of a power winger at 11 that's a little bit bigger in stature. So we haven't really seen that, but that's been not due to form or anything, but that's been due to Cheslin Colby, who struggled with a few niggles over the past few years, so that's why we haven't seen it. I think only in one test, maybe against France last year, they both started. But before that, I can't remember it. But that's more been because of Cheslin Colby's injury record over the past 2 or 3 years.
Didn't they start in Mbombela? Who were the wingers in Mbombela? Wasn't it Arendse and Colby?
Mbombela was Mapimpi and Arendse.
Ah, okay. Fair enough. But then the question I wanted to ask and put it out to you guys on the panel is, do we then, regarding the situation right now, obviously, Kirtley Arendse is in fine form. Obviously, there's also another guy by the name of Moody in the mix. And then there is Colby, and then there's Mapimpi. Going to the World Cup, I don't think one of these guys is not going to be selected, obviously. Obviously, maybe a lot of you are probably thinking Moody won't probably go. But what if Mapimpi doesn't go to the World Cup or not chosen? Is there a possibility of Rassie and Ninaba? I keep going to Rassie because I think he's basically coaching that side. Of Rassie not selecting Mapimpi? Spare, you want to jump into this particular question?
No, I think Mapimpi is definitely going to the World Cup, because currently, as much as we can debate between Kirtley and Mapimpi, it seems like the coaches do trust and back Mapimpi. As fans, we have all these opinions, but I think he's definitely going. I think the person who bite the dust is Kane Moody, simply because I feel like Jesse Creel is also definitely going to the World Cup, and we know when he is needed at wing, they put him at wing. So there's definitely going to be one outside back who's going to stay, and I think that's going to be Kane Moody.
Fair enough. All right, gentlemen, the one last topic of the conversation. There's been quite a lot of conversations prior to the 2021-2022 seasons regarding South Africa having moved to the URC and obviously having left Super Rugby. Obviously, the banter between South Africans and New Zealanders has always been there for a very long time. There was also assumptions that New Zealand would lose the whole physical element. And obviously there's been previous players and some of the current coaches within the Super Rugby element who've come out and said, hey, we've missed the South African physicality in the competition, etc., etc. And obviously then most fans genuinely believe that without the South Africans part of the Super Rugby, New Zealanders might lose the physical edge to their coaching structure, to their teams, etc., etc. From what we've seen now, obviously we can start looking at New Zealand from the Irish test. And you're going to jump in here. From the Irish test to last weekend, I mean, there has been gradual improvement with new coaches coming into the setup. But do we honestly believe that not having South African teams participating in Super Rugby has that effect or has affected the New Zealanders' physicality in international rugby? And you can start it off and then we'll move around with the other guys' answers as well.
In international rugby, I think the answer is no. Obviously, like the change and the South African teams joining the URC has greatly benefited the URC and it's probably a detrimental effect on Super Rugby. But in international rugby terms, I don't think so. Every former professional player who you listen to interviewed will say, the step up to test rugby is huge and there's a massive difference. So if these players are playing international footy regularly, there isn't going to be that drop off. So for me, it's definitely had a negative effect. Like if you look at the Super Rugby tournament this year, it's dominated by the New Zealand sides again. So attendance seems to be down for some teams. So domestically speaking, in New Zealand, it's had a negative effect. But in terms of international footy, I don't think so. I think the Allblacks are too good. They play enough regular international games. So for me, no. But domestically, absolutely has had a negative effect. But great for us Europeans up here, to be honest.
Spare Hugh spare Jade and then Hugh at the end.
No, I don't think South African teams moving away from the Super Rugby has any effect on the All Black physicality. And I've said this before on the timeline that South African fans overestimate the importance because they'll go and say New Zealand have lost the physical aspect of their game because they don't have those physical opponents. Yet so many of our players are playing in Japan, such a weak league in terms of physicality, but they still go and boast that the Springboks are the most physical team in the world. So I don't think it has any relation to international rugby. I think the strength and conditioning and the way that the coaches prepare the players for the All Blacks has everything to do with the physicality and not necessarily South African teams participating in the Super Rugby.
Fair. Jade?
Okay, I'm going to break this down shortly into two parts. So the first part I'm going to say is no, they don't, because if you're looking at it, right, the Springbok or the SA teams has had a big influence in the Super Rugby, especially, and the Jaguars as well. Let's not count them out of it. However, the problem is that if you're looking at the history of Super Rugby, we've only had 3 South African winners while they were in it, and it's only been one team, the Bulls. And if you're looking at the current state of South African rugby, all the teams play differently. There's no one South African team or 2 or 3 teams that play a similar brand of rugby. They drift differently. So Jake White has his plans, Plumtree will have his plans next year, Dobson has his plans and views. So it's not like you're playing a New Zealand team with similar traits, in their game. The other important thing to note where I think New Zealand do miss them is for the younger player, like a guy like, for example, Fletcher Newell or Tamati Williams earning their first cap. Those guys have never played the Lions or the Bulls at Loftus in Super Rugby. Now they're playing the Boks at Loftus. We've seen it with Australia a few weeks ago. That is where they miss them. That is where they miss the SA teams for that trip to altitude, to test and try their condition. However, it's difficult to say, New Zealand misses South Africa or South Africa misses New Zealand. I think from the Super Rugby perspective, Super Rugby is fast, quick. You can't compare it to European rugby, which is more structured and more, it's more tactical. We should stop actually having this comparison and banter and saying this league is better than that league, because the game is played over a calendar now that allows everybody and the time period, everybody to view different tournaments, and the game is there available for all of us. So for me, I would say no, they don't, but the younger players might miss that games against the Bulls and the Lions.
Fair enough. You?
So my theory is that if the New Zealand teams only played Super Rugby Aotearoa, as in they only played each other, I think the All Blacks would be equally as prepared for international rugby as if they played anybody else. I think that the some of the derbies between the New Zealand teams and Super Rugby were very, very close to test match level, as close as I've seen some of them. So I don't think that they lose anything. Just a point on physicality. I think physicality, what do we mean? Do we mean size? Because obviously the South Africans are they come across as the biggest team. If you look at some of the stats, they maybe don't have the biggest individual players, but they do, as a team, seem to be sort of the biggest. But if we talk about contact skills, the Kiwis are absolutely excellent. The French and the Irish and the Kiwis, I think a big reason why they are top in the world rankings is because their technique going into contact, the little step, the making sure they catch the opponent on the weak shoulder, they're going into contact on their own terms.
Yeah.
The work after they go into contact, it's not just about size, it's about technique as well. And the one thing that the Kiwis have always had is the ability to play fast for longer periods. So they may not be physical in terms of their huge mountains of men, but they are physical in terms of their cardio, and their ability to be fast for longer is a huge advantage for them. So, when we talk about physicality, I think they're just physical differently. That's all it is. And I think that they wouldn't gain anything by playing anybody different at club level.
Jade?
Yeah, so I want to answer on that physicality part, and I agree with you, because if you look at the physicality between the box and then you look at maybe the URC teams, the African team, there's a big drop-off. It's not that same intensity. You can see the difference. When those guys are playing for the box, you can see there's a big physicality. The scrums, you can see that the big boys come to play. But when you're looking at the URC, you see more of their skills, you see more of their offloading games, you see more of their running attributes. So yeah, I agree with you in terms of that. And the other thing that we do not note with Super Rugby is there is a lot of physicality as well, because with the Moana Pacifica there and the Ndrua as well, those are physical teams. Physical in different aspects. Physical in their running game, physical big backline players. So it's not to say that it's just the Africans that has this physicality. There's a lot of physical rugby players around the world now.
No, fair enough, gentlemen. Fair enough. To round it off, if there's no other questions regarding obviously what has transpired during the week, I think we are set to close this one off on a very good note. And obviously, thanks guys for joining me once again for the Rugby Scoop. And then we're gonna host on Friday again for our predictions for Saturday. And then obviously Sunday again, we do the recap and obviously looking into the Bledisloe Cup and obviously looking into the Springboks and Argentina game. So Fridays is our predictions space, and then Sundays is our recap space. Thanks, gents. Thank you for joining once again, and also the listeners as well. TP, I see you over there. Uncle M, I see you there. Spare, thanks for joining us. Jade and Hugh, see you guys on Friday. Let me know if you guys can't join, obviously in time, so we can also do some preparations as well and not get caught with my pants down this like today. All right, gents, thank you very much, and obviously see you guys on the timeline, and obviously enjoying our chats and banter on the timeline, and obviously then see you guys on Friday and then Sunday. Have a great week. Cheers.
Thanks, gents. Talk to you Friday.
Cheers.
Ah, fuck me. I forgot about Australia. We didn't have time.